I'd like you to turn with me this morning, if you would, to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 7, beginning our reading at verse 2, and I'm reading this morning from the New Living Translation. 1 Samuel chapter 7, beginning our reading at verse 2. The ark remained in Kiriath Jearim for a long time, 20 years in all. During that time, all Israel mourned because it seemed that the Lord had abandoned them. Then Samuel said to all the people of Israel, "If you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Ashtoreth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey Him alone. Then He will rescue you from the Philistines." So the Israelites got rid of their images of Baal and Ashtoreth and worshipped only the Lord. Then Samuel told them, "Gather all of Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah, and in a great ceremony drew water from a well and poured it out before the Lord. They also went without food all day and confessed that they had sinned against the Lord. It was at Mizpah that Samuel became Israel's judge. When the Philistine rulers heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they mobilized their army and advanced. The Israelites were badly frightened when they learned that the Philistines were approaching. "Don't stop pleading with the Lord our God to save us from the Philistines," they begged Samuel. So Samuel took a young lamb and offered it to the Lord as a whole burnt offering. He pleaded with the Lord to help Israel, and the Lord answered him. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines arrived to attack Israel. But the Lord spoke with a mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day, and the Philistines were thrown into such confusion that the Israelites defeated them. The men of Israel chased them from Mizpah to a place below Beth-kar, slaughtering them all along the way. Samuel then took a large stone and placed it between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshananah. He named it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help, for he said, "Up to this point the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again for some time. And throughout Samuel's lifetime, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the Philistines. It was a dark period of history in Israel's past. The Philistines had dominated and had oppressed God's people for a period of about 40 years. If you go back a couple of chapters, we find the story of an overweight, undisciplined, spiritually weak, compromised leader by the name of Eli. And though Eli is the priest who will train young Samuel, who will become perhaps the greatest judge and priest of Israel's history, Eli himself is a terrible leader. He allows his wicked sons, Hophni and Phinehas, to make a mockery of the office of the priesthood. These greedy sons are taking the offerings that people are bringing to the tabernacle, and they're keeping them for themselves. They use their position to line their own pockets and to satisfy their sinful desires. It even says that they were having sex with women who served in the tent of meeting, perhaps even inside God's house. And Eli does nothing to restrain or to stop them. And so God announces through His prophet that judgment is coming upon the house of Eli, and that God will raise up for Himself another priest, a faithful priest, who will lead His people. Look back with me at 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 35. The prophet says, "I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and mind. I will firmly establish his priestly house, and they will minister before my anointed one always. And we know that this priest was to be Samuel. Well, God waits a while. He allows young Samuel to grow up, and then he sends the Philistines against Israel. The battle is not going well. The army of Israel is being defeated. And so someone gets the bright idea, well, let's send down to Shiloh and get the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe if we have that sacred chest, that sacred box that has the Ten Commandments inside of it, and where the presence of God dwells in the Holy of Holies. If we go get that box and we bring it out into the battlefield with us, maybe it'll work like a lucky charm and we'll defeat the Philistines. But it doesn't work that way. They couldn't be more wrong. God doesn't respond like a magic genie when you rub the lamp. The ark is captured by the Philistines. Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, are killed in battle. When the old priest hears the news that his sons have been killed and the ark has been captured, it says he falls over backwards and he breaks his neck and he dies. His daughter-in-law, who is 9 months pregnant at the time, goes into labor and she has a son which she fittingly names Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. What a name. The glory has departed. The presence of God no longer dwells among His people. It seems that God has abandoned Israel. They are on their own and things are not going well. Can I just interject something here? God often does that. If we persist in our disobedience and in our rebellion, God will just withdraw His presence. He'll just leave us alone for a while, and we will reap the results of our own disobedience. Well, to make a long story short, eventually the Ark of the Covenant causes the Philistines so much trouble that they put it on a cart and they send it back to Israel. And after a couple of moves, it ends up at Abinadab's house in Kiriath Jearim, where it remains collecting dust for some 20 years. In the meantime, Samuel has grown up. He's assumed the position as the leader of God's people. And notice 1 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 2. It says, "The ark remained in Kiriath Jearim for a long time, 20 years in all. During that time, all Israel mourned because it seemed the Lord had abandoned them." The people began to complain. They began to recognize things are not going so well with us since God has departed. And there seems to be a stirring among the people. A few of them, at least, begin to realize we need God's presence. We need revival. We need a downpour. And they come to Samuel. And Samuel gives them a challenge in verse 3. And this really is the text for our message this morning. "Then Samuel said to the people of Israel, 'If you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, and if you'll get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Ashtoreth, turn your hearts to the Lord and obey Him alone, and then He will rescue you from the Philistines.'" If you want revival, if you want to experience His presence again, then this is what you need to do. Return to the Lord with all your heart. Not a halfway commitment, no partial consecration, but a total, unreserved, all-out, all-in commitment to the Lord. Now you say, "Pastor, what does that look like this morning?" What does it really mean to turn to the Lord with all of your heart? What does it mean to give God my all, my everything. Well, I think Samuel outlines for us here in this passage what we might call a fourfold process of consecration. This is what it means to be consecrated fully to the Lord. And this is what I believe it takes for us to experience real revival and a downpour of God's Spirit. The first step in this consecration process is to remove anything that hinders your relationship with God. And when I say anything, I mean everything that might be a rival for first place in your heart. Now, that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be evil. It might even be a good thing. But if it crowds God out, then it's a problem. Look with me at 1 Samuel chapter 7 again, verse 3 and 4. Then Samuel said to the people of Israel, if you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Ashtoreth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey Him alone. Then He will rescue you from the Philistines. So the Israelites got rid of their images of Baal and Ashtoreth and worshipped only the Lord. Now I want you to notice something here. These gods of Ashtoreth and Baal were Canaanite gods. These gods were already there when the Israelites crossed the Jordan and entered into the Promised Land. The Israelites didn't invent these gods. They didn't make them up. They simply allowed them to exist. They didn't get rid of them. And that was their downfall. You see, I don't believe they started worshiping these gods immediately upon entering into the Promised Land. They walked by them a while. They just looked at them a long time before they finally bowed down and worshiped them. They first allowed them to occupy a space in their land, in their neighborhood, and before long, they occupied a place in their heart. Listen to me carefully here for just a moment. I don't think most people make a conscious effort to push God out of their lives. We don't just wake up one morning and decide, you know what, I think I'm no longer going to serve God. I'm going to worship an idol today. No, it's way more gradual. It's way more subtle than that. Over a period of time, God just gets edged out. We're too busy. We're too involved. The things of the world, the culture, begins to crowd God out until one day we realize that God is no longer our number one. He may not even be number 6. He's down about 17 or 18 somewhere on our list of priorities. And the problem is that these rival gods, once they get a hold of us, once they wrap themselves around our hearts, they're difficult to get rid of. It's hard. It's a battle to expel them and to make Jesus number one again. How many of you have ever read anything by A.W. Tozer? Anybody ever read any of Tozer? A few of you. Great prophet and preacher of the past century. His devotional writings are a little deep. They make you think, but often he's right on target. In his book, The Pursuit of God, Tozer says this about things or idols in our life. Listen to this statement. He says, they must be torn out of the heart like a plant from the soil. They must be extracted in blood like a tooth from the jaw. They must be expelled from our souls with a violence, as Christ expelled the money changers from the temple. That's pretty blunt, isn't it? You can't fool around. It's got to be ripped out of there if we're going to get rid of it. In other words, it's not going to be easy to make Christ first in your life. You're not going to remove those spiritual strongholds that hinder spiritual growth easily. They're not going to go quietly. It's going to take some effort to get rid of those things in your life. Now, I realize that A.W. Tozer might be a little deep for some of us this morning, so I thought I'd share something a little less theological this morning, like peanuts. If you can't take Tozer, maybe Lucy and Linus will be more in your liking this morning. There's one particular comic strip I read some time ago. Lucy is mad. She's upset in this comic strip. She's complaining. She says, "Mother promised me a birthday party, but just because I was bad, now I don't get to have one," she says. And so Linus, her brother, tells her, "Lucy," he says, "you're not using the right strategy." He says, "Here's what you need to do." He says, "Why not go up to Mom and say, 'I'm sorry, dear Mother. I admit that I've been bad and you were right to cancel my party, but from now on, I'm going to try to be good.'" Linus says, "If you do that, I'll bet you end up getting the party anyway. If you just admit it, admit you were wrong." Well, Lucy thinks about it for a while. She walks around, she goes in the next room, she even rehearses her speech a couple of times in the mirror to see how it sounds. She reflects on it, and then she comes back to Linus and she says, "No way." She says, "I'd rather die. I can't do it." Isn't that a lot like us this morning? God may speak to our heart. He may put His finger on that one place in our life where we know we're holding back. He may point out that one stubborn sin that keeps us from making an all-out commitment. God knows what it is. We know what it is. But we just say, "No, Lord, I just can't release it. I'd rather die. I just can't give it up. I just can't let it go." And so often we miss out on God's blessings. Now follow me for a moment here. I think God knows how difficult this is for us. He knows how hard it is for us to come to this point of casting out, removing idols from our lives. And so God conspires to bring us, many times, to the point of surrender. And you know how He does that? Two things that I think He uses to get us to turn away from those idols and turn to Him. Number one, He uses our helplessness. That's exactly what happens to the Israelites here in this passage. They're beaten down for so long, they become so desperate that there's nothing else for them to do except turn to the Lord. Sometimes God has to do that in our lives, doesn't He? He allows us to hit rock bottom. He allows us to sink to that point where we know we can't make it on our own. And in our helplessness, when we know there's no human way out, that's when we turn to Him. Sometimes this morning our problems, our tragedies, turn out to be a blessing in disguise because they point us toward God. And sometimes God uses our helplessness to help us see how much we really need Him. And then the second thing God does is He offers us hope. Once these Israelites get to that desperation point, they turn to Samuel, and Samuel gives them hope in this dark situation. He says, "If you return to the Lord, if you get rid of those foreign gods and those images, if you turn your hearts to the Lord and obey Him alone, then," He says, "He will rescue you. He will deliver you from the Philistines." In the midst of their trouble, God is offering hope. And oh, how the world needs to hear that message from us as believers this morning. We live in a world filled with hopelessness today. Many feel trapped and in bondage to sin. They don't see any way out. Many are desperate and feel like they've got nothing to live for this morning. Oh, how we need to tell them. They need to hear that there is hope in Jesus Christ. If you'll just turn from your sin, if you'll bring the mess of your life and give it to Him, He will deliver you. He will change you. But there's a second step in this process of consecration. Not only do we need to remove these things that may be hindering us in our relationship to God, but secondly, we must direct our hearts to the Lord. The New Living Translation here in verse 3 says, "Turn your hearts to the Lord." The NIV says, commit yourselves to the Lord. But I particularly like the New American Standard Bible, which says, direct your hearts to the Lord. That may be the most literal translation of that. Not only do we need to get rid of those things that are messing us up and causing us to sin, but our focus needs to be on Jesus. I want you to do a little experiment with me this morning. I want you to look around and see somebody that's wearing blue this morning. You see any blue? Not as much out there as I thought this morning. You see somebody that's wearing, you didn't get the memo, did you? You were supposed to wear blue today. What's interesting is once you start concentrating on blue, it's amazing how that jumps out at you. When you're thinking about blue, you hardly notice red and green and brown. How many of you ever bought a new car some point in your life? You pick out the one you like, the particular style and color, and as soon as you drive it off the lot, you begin to notice other cars all over town that are just like yours. I remember when we bought the Ford Fusion that I have several years ago, I'd never seen one quite that color and style, and then as soon as I got it, I realized I probably saw 10 on the way home. There are hundreds of those things around, just identical to it. I remember a number of years ago now, we were on vacation in Florida, and we came out of a restaurant one morning after breakfast, and there was a family trying to get into our car. And I told the guy, I'm sorry, I was trying to be polite. Sorry, sir, but that's my car you're trying to get into. And the guy said, oh, well, no wonder the key won't open the lock. It turns out theirs was about three spots down, and it was identical to our car. The weird thing was it even had Virginia license plates on it. They had even bought it at the same dealership in Roanoke that we had bought ours from, and turns out they lived in Roanoke. And here we were in Florida with two cars identical, 3 spaces apart. My point is, once you begin to focus on a certain color or a certain style or a certain pattern, that's what you notice. And I think the same principle applies spiritually. Many people go through their day never even thinking about God or about the Lord. The only time He even crosses their mind is when they're in trouble or they need something. But the person whose mind is directed at the Lord wakes up thinking about God, wakes up thinking about Jesus. They go to bed praising the Lord at night, all day, and everything that happens, they see the Lord's hand. And when we begin to do that, it changes everything. Direct your mind to the Lord. Keep your eyes focused on Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. The third step in this process of consecration is that we must serve the Lord only. Look at verse 3. He says, if you're returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourself of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord, and serve Him only. Now, we've been emphasizing the God alone part of this, that God will accept no rivals. He wants to have first place in our heart. But I want to put the emphasis on that word serve, because He also wants us to serve Him. I think we neglect the service part sometimes. God doesn't save us just so we can enjoy all of His blessings and join Him in heaven someday. No, He expects us to serve Him. He expects us to join Him in ministry. You know what I think will be a sign that revival has come to Parkway Wesleyan Church? I think one of the indicators, one of the chief indicators of that will be we won't have to beg people to get involved. We won't have to twist arms to get people to teach Sunday school. We won't have to offer free vacations to Disney World in order to get them to keep the nursery. We haven't tried that yet. Maybe that's a tactic we can use. You see, if we aren't willing to serve the Lord, if we don't want to see His kingdom advanced, then I wonder, do we really love Jesus this morning? One of the great invitation songs I remember from years ago was that old hymn, I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. I'll be what you want me to be. Remember that one? A beautiful song of commitment. I've heard it sung with great emotion. But maybe a more truthful way to sing that song would be this way. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. Real service is what I desire. I'll sing a solo anytime, dear Lord, but don't ask me to sing in the choir. I'll do what you want me to do, dear Lord. I'd like to see things come to pass, but don't ask me to teach boys and girls, dear Lord. I'd rather just sit in my class. I'll do what you want me to do, dear Lord. I yearn for thy kingdom to come. I'll give you my nickels and dimes, dear Lord, but please don't ask me for more. Serve the Lord and Him alone. He deserves this morning our best effort. If we're not doing anything for Jesus this morning, then we're not really being totally obedient, because He's got something for you to do in the kingdom of God this morning. The fourth step in this process of consecration is to rest in the Lord. Look with me at 1 Samuel chapter 7. Skip down to verse 12. It says, Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shin. He named it Ebenezer, saying, Thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they stopped invading Israel's territory. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. Now, what was the point of setting up this stone of Ebenezer that it talks about here? This reminder of what the Lord has done for His people. Well, I think it was to remind the people we can trust in the Lord our God. Thus far, it says, the Lord has helped us. In other words, He did it once. We can trust Him to do it again. And throughout Samuel's lifetime, it says they have victory over the Philistines. Consecration means that everything belongs to the Lord this morning, even the problems. You see, I don't know if you found this true in your life, but I have in mine, the longer I hang on to a problem, as long as I fret and I worry and I spend sleepless nights thinking about it, it's my problem. I feel responsible for it. I keep thinking I need to do something to solve it. I've got to work it out. But once I give it to the Lord, then it's His problem. And I can rest. That changes everything. Now, I admit to you this morning that sometimes as your pastor, I have trouble with this one. You know, I kind of think it's my job sometimes as pastor to solve problems. Sometimes I worry and I fret and I try to come up with a plan. And then the Lord will remind me, Barry, is this your church or is this my church? Haven't I helped you in the past? Haven't I come to your rescue dozens of times? And I'll say, yes, Lord, it's yours. I'll trust you. I'll give it to you. I'll let you work it out. You show us what to do. You take care of it. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to bed. And, it's amazing how well that works. Just give it to God and then you can rest. We need to learn that process of turning our problems over to Him and letting Him take care of them. God's message to the Israelites is simple this morning. We see it again in verse 3. If you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods, your images of Ashereth. Turn to the Lord your God and obey Him alone, and then He will rescue you from the Philistines. This, and I'll close this morning. F.B. Meyer was a great English preacher, contemporary of D.L. Moody, who was greatly used of the Lord both in England and in the United States in the late 19th, early 20th century. Early in his ministry, F.B. Meyer says he was frustrated by a lack of power. He went to see an old missionary friend of his who God was greatly using, and his friend asked him a very pointed question. He said, FB, he says, have you ever committed yourself to Christ totally? And Meyer said, well, he said, I've done sort of in kind of a general way, but never really specifically. And the missionary said, you need to do it specifically. You need to make this total consecration of yourself to Christ. And so Meyer says he went home and he got on his knees and he began to pray. And as he prayed, he said, the Lord brought to his mind a vision. He could see in this vision a large iron ring filled with keys. And in his vision, he was giving that ring of keys to the Lord. And the Lord asked him the question, are all the keys here? And Meyer said, yes, Lord, they're all there, except for one. There's this one locked closet. There's this one area of my life that I've just got to keep. I can't give you that one. I've got to keep control of that one area. At that, he said, in his vision, Jesus handed him back the ring and said, if you don't trust me in all, then you don't trust me at all. And Meyer says he tried to bargain with God. He said, Lord, I'll be so devoted in all of these other areas of my life. I'll give everything. I'll give it my 110%. I'll do it all. He said, but I've just got to hold on to that one closet. Meyer said he felt like his whole life was kind of hanging in the balance, and he knew that if he kept that key to that closet, he would never have God's full blessing on his life. Meyer said it seemed like Christ was receding from him, and so he called him back and he said, Lord, I'm not willing, but I'm willing to be made willing. He said at that, Christ took that key out of his hand, that key to that locked closet. He said, I knew what he would find there, and he did too. He said within a week, he had cleaned it out completely, but he had filled it with something so much better. And Meyer laments, he says, what a fool I was. He only wanted to take away sham jewels to give me the real ones. He took away the thing that was eating out of my life and instead gave me himself. Friends, I believe this morning that's what God wants to do for every one of us. Let's return to him. Let's quit bargaining and making excuses this morning. Let's turn over the keys, the whole ring, and give him access to every room and every area and every locked door, for only then will we experience his deliverance and his power and his blessing. Only then will we experience a downpour.